Hey everyone, it's Ivan with KPadger.com. I'm here at Q with
Brian McDonald.
What is your special title?
It's just engineer.
Just engineer for Q. Also responsible for the pretty awesome machine that presses those PIM nuts into aluminum.
Yes, and several other fixtures.
Which is amazing. But today we're going to talk about your baby you've been working on, which is this guy right here, which is the Erector 9. Before we dive into the Erector 9, kind of the genesis of it, how did the original Erector 22 come about?
Well, when we first started the company, we wanted tube silencers, and I'd already done the El Camino.
And this is one of the baffles for the El Camino?
This is an El Camino baffle, yeah.
Okay.
So we stacked these up in a tube, and it was just pretty obvious that if it had threads and threads, that we could connect them without a tube. So I took it home on a weekend and threw threads on it and brought it back in, showed it to Ethan, and he just said print it. So we 3D printed the parts, and that was
these
the
are
first
the
Erector.
original pieces for the original Erector?
Yeah. So the internal guts are the same as an El Camino. They don't quite perform exactly the same, but well.
And was it just kind of like, why not?
Yeah, it was just, this could be awesome. So just tried new things, and we were blank slate. It was the first month of the company probably. These aren't that hard for me to draw anymore. So we kind of got the whole thing designed, and we were pushing towards this tube, and it's like I could break these apart and we could have variable length and all kinds of things. So we made the Erector and shot it. The length isn't set by a tube, so we just bought all the baffles and put together however many we wanted and started testing.
Yeah.
We just said throw 10 baffles on it, and that'll give a person the ability to go much longer than a traditional silencer and be quieter. And if they want to go short, for some reason it's on a rifle and you only want enough to be hearing safe, that's available to you now too.
That is, honestly, that's one of my favorite things about the Erector, because like if I go and shoot with my boys, we can use subsonic, shorten it down. Now I don't have something long where it doesn't need to be long hanging off the end of a rifle, and quiet as I need it to be. These things are cool. And so this was, how soon after this was it like, oh, we should make one in 9mm?
Oh, it was immediate. 9mm has a bunch of extra problems because it needs the booster system and everything.
All right,
but
so ultimately more complex when you start dipping into that.
Yeah, a lot more parts to align, it's longer, but mostly the guts. Making a piston work without a tube was a strange challenge. So it wasn't that bad. I mean, we did it.
Yeah.
But this one was kind of almost one shot, and we did very little tweaking from the initial design, and it was ready to go. And it's awesome. It's performed very well.
I love that thing. All right, well, I guess let's dive into how the Erector 9 came to be as far as some of the testing.
Well, the beginning of the 9mm Erector, we tried to take the 22 Erector and just scale it up. So we built this, but when you take it with the exact same proportions as 22, it was loud. It was terribly loud. So we had to test extensively to find the correct shape.
Basically, going back to test different baffle shapes.
Yeah. So we broke it apart to simulate the internal geometry, and we made these cones with rings. This cone is the inside cone.
Okay, representative of one baffle.
Right, and the ring represented the outside of this, but I could do them in pieces. So what we did is we made a bunch of these at different cone angles, and then we could step through slot widths and all kinds of things. Took tons and tons of data, but tested.
When you say cone widths, like this diameter and how drastically it tapers down? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
gotcha.
we tried this. We had a horn-shaped one that perform very well in 9. But the other thing that I eventually realized is this cone doesn't stick out. So it's actually not down into the inside of the cone,
All right.
but these are.
Like they almost nest in each other, like depth-wise?
Yeah, so this surface on the baffle sits on this surface on the inside of the one before it.
Oh, okay.
And this cone's actually down below that surface. So
Dang, okay.
the cones are nested.
So completely different than the Erector.
Oh, completely different, yes.
So you couldn't just scale it up.
No, unfortunately, these things don't work that way. And we take all of the experience we have, but we don't know how to
Yeah.
guess
no.
correctly the first time. So,
Science wizardry.
yeah, it really comes down to really, really good testing practice, objective, and taking tons of data until you figure out where the sweet spot is.
Okay, and you have this whole box full of cones, basically.
Yeah,
And so you just rotate through like stack after stack and just keep metering?
yeah, and then we kept altering in between.
Okay.
So I had 4 different cone shapes. We did things with the spacer and that would decide how far the cones nest.
Okay.
And then these notches have a lot to do with it. And you can see some of these are much larger. I don't know if that'll show up on video.
We'll get a close-in shot of it. So at a certain point, was it scaling getting quieter and quieter, or then did it kind of just taper off as far as diminishing returns, as far as playing with the different sizes and stuff?
I actually had a bunch of lines that look like spaghetti.
All right.
I was testing more than one factor.
Okay.
So cone angle was a known difference between all of my tests.
All right.
And I was always testing 4 at a time. And then as you went through the notches, some of them peaked and got to the quietest they were ever going to be. So you're watching the sound go down, and then it turns a corner and it starts going back up after you've missed your passed your sweet spot.
Yeah.
But others were still on their way, right? And the ones that kind of hit their best early were discarded because they just weren't good enough.
Yeah.
We have very stringent sound testing before you reach the benchmark that makes your product good enough to be released. And getting this quiet enough was a lot of testing.
So we'll go into 2 things, but first of all, for the layman that doesn't understand silencers, like how they work, let's touch on that real quick. Basically, we're shedding hot gases and reducing sound in doing so, right?
Yes. We're also slowing down the gases released to atmosphere. So it's a restriction. Gas, if it came out of the muzzle, would hit atmosphere in some time. And making it go through all of this, it's disadvantageous flow, and it gets stuck in the silencer. So you deliver all the gas over a longer time period and create less
Which
sound.
in turn reduces the sound.
Yes. And you're forcing it through restrictions, which is dumping some of the heat out and hopefully dropping the pressure.
Sound metering is, I don't know, I feel like it's the wild, wild west because there is a mill standard for it. The equipment is super expensive, and you could argue that like the method is antiquated as far as like what they're looking for and where, but it is the standard, but most people don't adhere to it. So when people throw out decibel numbers, like they're just wild and arguably useless most of the time. But having talked with you guys, rather than trying to meter and be like, oh, like we got fancy numbers, because it can change atmospheric, snow, all those different things. And so you guys meter relative to a standard you've set, right?
Oh, always.
Okay, so for example, with your 9mm, what is kind of the gold standard that you guys are measuring against when you're like, we need to beat this with respect to sound?
We were measuring with an AAC Tyrant.
Okay.
And because conditions will change, so the same silencer will meter different on different days, and the spread can be 5 or 6 decibels.
Which is huge because it's a factor of 10, right? Okay.
So when you have a known, and we never changed the tyrant, right? We just bought it off the shelf, so it should behave in the same manner all the time, and it's the one constant through our data, so that we measure a relative sound difference.
Gotcha. So you'll measure different iterations of the Erector 9 against the Tyrant 9.
Yeah.
As you start trying to figure out like the best geometry for baffles.
Yeah,
Okay.
we take obviously real measurements, and we're very careful with our method, because small variations can change things a lot. Like if you take your sound a little bit in front of the muzzle or a little bit behind, you can radically change it. So when people make videos, even if they're really doing their best to show the meter, very subtle changes can make them win.
Interesting.
We don't want to win.
Yeah, you want to win the internal race.
We want to win a fair fight. We don't want to cheat.
No,
because
I
cheating
can dig it.
makes our product worse.
No, absolutely. So you guys coming full circle through all the testing, now the Erector 9 that you guys have beat the benchmark you had, right?
We did.
Awesome.
Barely. It's a difficult one to beat.
I imagine especially with something this modular, like
yeah, and
different factors going on.
you do. It's strange because when you look at it in the computer, the internal geometry looks the same, but you lose something. Modular is harder to make quiet, so it was a bigger challenge. Plus, some of the complexity, the Tyrant has K baffles. To make that in an Erector is extremely difficult. So you're limited to some of the things where, the bend in the K would be inside, which means you can't get there.
You can't machine
You can't machine it, right?
Yeah.
I have figured out how to do it, and we have some
prohibitive?
Not necessarily. We could make it, but we also have a benefit where these baffles don't shift your point of aim as much as a K baffle.
Interesting. Okay.
So with the Tyrant is kind of a scaled up element as far as baffle geometry.
Okay.
And when we shot the element against the El Camino when we developed it, we did can off, can on test with it was a Ruger 1022.
Yeah, just checking
and you
point
could,
aim.
Yeah, you could see a point of aim shift on the element, but the El Camino just doesn't have one. And that test is a little bit more difficult to perform on 9. We always test on a pistol too.
Gotcha.
So seeing where you aimed is harder, but we could do it. It's hard, you need silencer sights.
Yeah.
We really need to put it on a rifle and make sure that that's true, but I still believe this has far less shift than a K baffle.
Interesting.
So, being that we can get to the same sound readings, which is what you really want, is to be quiet and still shoot to where your sights are, we do have a benefit there.
Nice. That's very cool. So I guess at this point, let's dive into the Erector 9. The heart of the Erector 9 is baffles like the Erector 22, right?
Sure.
And how do those work as far as different surfaces, how they stack, all those things?
So we're threaded, male on one end and female on the other, so that they correspond to one another, and that's what actually holds them together.
Okay, and all of these pieces are the same, like through the whole baffle stack until we get to the rear and the very front, right? They're all interchangeable.
Yeah, so we have from the back, this one's the encapsulator. We'll talk about that after. This one's a baffle, it's the blast baffle.
Okay.
This one's 17.4, so that stainless.
Okay.
The first baffle takes the most abuse, the muzzle blast. And we don't want it to wear out. So it also has the serial number on it, which is
important
and
for
weird.
some people.
I mean, it's important for us if we want to stay open.
Yeah.
But generally, this would be on the tube. We don't have a tube.
Yes.
So,
but it's also far enough back to where it's important for people that do things they shouldn't do and request RMA numbers.
Yeah, it's a steel part, so it's least likely to be damaged.
And the
it's
furthest back, right?
It's
more or less.
It is, but yeah, we just had to pick a place to put it.
Yeah. Don't wreck your cans by doing things you shouldn't do, but if you do, these are replaceable. That serialized part is not,
Yeah,
because it's serialized.
right. The serial number has to remain intact.
Yeah.
It's also a very major component, right? The blast baffle is pretty important. So in geometry-wise, once you get away from material, it's identical to the rest of them. And then there's 9 more baffles in the front. The front cap.
And so it's a total of 10 baffles, including the blast baffle.
Yes.
As far as like when you originally purchased it, like what it comes with is 10 baffles, right?
10 baffles, correct.
Okay.
And you can never get more. We can't sell them in pieces, unfortunately. That would be awesome, but it's not
That would be
allowed.
cool. Have you guys, I'm just personally curious, have you guys measured how many you can get away with before all this stacks up and you end up going off kilter?
Not in 9mm.
Okay.
Not
How
yet.
many was it in 22?
It was 16, but they were 3D printed. I really think if we took aluminum, we could probably,
Break 20?
I'm not going to guess at a number, but I think we could beat 16.
That's awesome.
We might be able to do 20.
That's awesome. Sorry, so you were saying the end cap.
So the end cap's a pretty regular silencer end cap. I will take wipes before it's finished.
Okay. Is that something that was driven by just like, hey, people want wipes for this thing?
Industry demand, yeah.
Interesting.
It's
Because I was talking with Ethan the other day about the 8.6 and about how like devastating it is with respect to accuracy.
devastating.
Yeah.
It's going to be just as bad here, but if what you want to do is fire a gun and have the least amount of sound come out of it, some people really like that.
Married to the idea.
I'm always interested in where my bullet goes, but you know,
Right.
to each his own.
Contact shot. Okay, so all these baffles are the same, and you were saying this edge is basically marrying up with the inside edge on these?
Yeah, and that's what sets your alignment, but it also is the interface where it seals.
Okay, I was
So-
going to say, yeah, you don't have carbon coming back on
Right.
your threads like that.
Which we did on purpose. But yeah, and you can see that it works. I mean, these have been shot. These threads are clean. And if you look down inside, you can see the ring.
Yeah, there's a distinct ring.
So after you shoot it, you do have to be careful about keeping that surface clean.
Gotcha.
Getting stuff underneath there is bad.
Okay, because it can, one, it'll let gas leak, but then also create not alignment.
Yes, not alignment is
Which
exactly
is
what it will create.
Not alignment is not good.
If I break enough of these apart, if you stack these, it becomes really obvious when you start doing this. Now, this is grossly
Yeah.
exaggerated, but you can imagine if you stacked another one just as crooked. This thing curves. And that's the
good.
analysis we have to do to make sure that it always has a hole where the bullet's going to go,
Yeah.
so that you don't hit stuff. And the steel surfaces, they're an area that you need to pay attention to. If you take it apart and it's dirty, you got to clean
Interesting.
those.
I didn't even think about that. And tools for that.
So early on, I had a design that did not work like this, and we egg-shaped the baffles as we were trying to crank them apart.
Dang.
So they were positive so that you could put a wrench on them.
Like you had wrench flats on them?
Yeah,
or-
wrench flats that stuck up, but they were real short because it gets crazy trying to do wrench
bet.
flats. And that actually, when they were so stuck together that when you put enough torque on it, it actually went across the corners, bent the thing out
Round
around,
them out.
and then after that, it bent permanently and they leaked forever. So we came up with this. This plastic wrench protects it. So
Same style as on the Erector 22, right?
Yep.
Scaled up.
this one actually works, just scaling it up.
Nice.
Same type of features on the outside also. So
Okay.
all of these radial cuts are wrench features.
Okay.
And you're going to make the pin push against, the radius on either side, and they're opposed. So when you twist, you put your torque in on both sides, and that gives it evenly.
Okay.
And that way, it's actual. So you try to crush the wrench, but you can't because it's strong enough to hold up. And the pins actually do all of the work, and you're putting in pure torque. You're not trying to
Yeah,
crush
the
the
pins
thing.
are going straight into the radius on the outside of the baffle, right?
Right, and when you're turning, if you drew a line between these pins, it would go straight through the center of it. So
Okay.
they're carefully located.
Yeah.
But
it was not made on accident like
no,
this.
and then it'll hold its shape so that when you clamp it on, you don't need 3 hands. Because if you have to hold this
Yeah.
closed, get a wrench on it, hold the other one closed, get a wrench on it. Lessons I learned the hard way.
Nice.
But you can put it in a vise. Generally, nobody has channel locks big enough for these, but they're like $15. And 2 sets of channel locks, they'll fit next to
Yeah,
each other on
easy day.
adjacent baffles, or end. One goes on the end of this also. That's what this feature is.
Oh, okay.
So-
like those,
Yeah, these cutouts.
that's pretty cool.
So you can always get all of the parts apart with the
this.
wrench. It works in the encapsulator, it works in the blast baffle. The only thing it won't do is the front cap, but that's a regular hex.
Yeah, just
Just
socket, right?
a little stylized to be prettier. But yeah, a socket will fit on it. It sticks up far enough for a box wrench too.
Okay, cool. Well, let's dip into the encapsulator, I guess. Let's go ahead and start with like how a piston works and why you even need one for the sake of this.
Okay. So this is the piston, and it's threaded to match the end of your barrel. And if you didn't have one, in almost all cases, the silencer would add too much mass to the slide of your pistol, and it wouldn't run. It wouldn't have enough energy to.
So if you fired it without a piston, basically the slide is just like, meh.
It's going to short stroke. Yeah, it'll never make it all the way back to its stop. It's going to jam on your first shot and never work correctly.
Single shot pistol.
Single shot malfunctioning pistol.
Yes. And so the piston allows.
So the piston, when the gun goes off and the slide goes back, the piston actually pulls out, lets the gun do its thing, and then the spring catches up and everything's fine. Once it's back, it'll finish
So
doing
it's
its job
basically
correctly.
delaying the weight of the silencer from having any input on the gun while it initially goes through its recoil cycle, right?
Yeah, it's intended at least to fully disconnect the mass of the silencer from the mass of the gun for
Okay.
function, and it does a pretty good job.
Right on.
It definitely allows it to function. So this goes in a hole, and if it didn't have teeth on it and something to engage, when you tried to turn your silencer, you would tighten nothing, and it would spin freely.
Oh, okay.
So inside of the encapsulator, there are teeth that correspond to this. So when the piston's fully engaged and you twist on this piece, you can tighten it onto your gun.
Okay.
Even
So-
though once it's on, this serves no purpose. It really is just to be able to transmit torque from here to here.
Okay. Interesting.
Then, there's a giant spring in there that allows it to return and to pull out when the gun goes off. But that's the connection method for a pistol,
Okay.
or at least for a semi-automatic pistol. Revolver wouldn't need it.
Or a P7 M8 with a fixed barrel.
True.
Although mine's not threaded, so non-starter anyway.
Also not very common.
No, not very. They should be because they're rad. So this will work. Obviously, all different configurations. This essentially having what, 2 baffles and in cap here,
3 with the blast baffle.
3 with blast baffle. All right, and the booster on here. So as this ends up getting rolled out, it's going to come. It's going to come with what? Obviously, it's going to come with the tools for taking it apart. It's going to come with all 10 baffles and then pistol booster.
It's
Probably.
going to come with at least 1 pistol booster, maybe 2. There's 2 standards, half 28 and 13.5 by 1 left hand.
All right.
That one's the European standard. I'm not sure what's going to come in the box at the moment.
All right.
We're going to have all the options. There'll also be at least 2 fixed mounts for 9mm carbines,
That'll be awesome.
subguns, the like. They don't
Very
need
cool.
a piston.
Yeah. Are you guys gonna make a 3-lug for it too?
That is on the books.
Yeah.
We're-
Along
We'll
with
see.
a lot of other things. On
Well,
the books.
it's going to go against our weight.
Yeah, like you're adding.
Yeah, you know, in addition to sound, we go for ultra lightweight, and
Yeah.
the 3-lug, an awful lot of it exists behind the muzzle, and
Yeah,
we're going
it's
to
a
have to
lot
add
of
a ton of
spring
mass.
and
We're still
everything
going to
like
make
that.
it,
All
but
right.
I don't. I have to. I just haven't yet.
Right on. Very cool. And so I'm curious, I don't think we've talked about this, but will you be able to shoot like sub 300 blackout through this thing?
Probably. We haven't tested it yet,
All right.
and I'm always reluctant to say yes, but
Yeah, no.
people are going to want to.
Yeah.
And once I get my fixed mounts, we need to go put some rounds through it and see what it will take. We'll
what it'll
blow
do.
some up, you know, so that we can
In the
make
name
sure
of
that
science.
in the name of science and I mean fun, because we can
Right.
blow them up without a 10-month wait and
Yeah.
you know, too many tears.
And then just go and make a journal line entry, be like, oh, this one blew up.
But we
No
also
worry.
we need to take our things to failure so that we can guarantee that customers won't, or at
Yeah.
least customers who use it in a reasonable manner won't.
Yeah. No. The reasonable manner is the important part right there.
That's the tough part.
Right now, you had mentioned you're pretty close to being done with like testing wise on these guys. And ballpark, as things stand, when you guys want to see these out?
First quarter of next year
Yeah.
is the goal.
Q1 2021,
Yeah.
with the caveat being it is currently 2020, which is a dumpster fire.
Sure is.
So who knows about that timeline? But no, it's cool. Like, I mean, the fact that you guys are this far along, and I can't say with 100% certainty, but I should be able to have one of these essentially still a like working prototype for the Coast to Coast tour that you'll be able to get hands on and put some rounds through. Almost 100% on that. I think it's just making sure there's parts in the back that we can put that thing together.
That's
which
right.
It's going to be pretty awesome.
We're gonna make
It's
sure
really
that
awesome.
happens.
I appreciate it, man. All right, well, Brian, I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Sure.
And giving us a rundown on your baby, the Erector 9. This thing's really cool, man.
Thanks.
It's really cool. But yeah, as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.